Hi guys. I had down from Tammy 4:15 to 4:45. Is that what you guys all had?
Huh? We had 4 o'clock to 4:45.
Okay, so she told me 30 minutes and I went back to look at the email and it said 4:15 to 4:45, but we'll go ahead and get started and then we can be done early. Does that sound good?
Yep, sounds great.
Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we will get started. Let me get this shared. All right, can everybody see that?
Yes.
All right, awesome. All right, well, we will go ahead and get started. This is all about the listening domain for English language learners. And it's kind of one of those domains that is usually one of our higher scores when we think about access. But then when we think about the overall listening skills of our ESL students, they do struggle with that academic listening and some of that conversational listening. So that's what we're going to talk about today. This is actually kind of a 4-part PD. Every week we'll talk about a new domain as far as it's concerned with ELL. I will share the entire presentation with you, and each week I will give you links to many different resources that you are welcome to use at your school, in your classroom. You can pass out, share however you want to. So a little bit about me. My name is Melissa Fresh, and this is my 23rd year of teaching. I've taught kindergarten, 1st grade, 4th grade, and 5th grade, and then this is my 7th year as the ESL teacher at Suncrest Elementary in Frankfort, Indiana. I was born and raised in Frankfort and married to my husband, Chris, and we have 2 children, Ben and Addie. A little bit about my school, if you're not familiar, Frankfort is kind of in between Indianapolis and Lafayette, a rural community. We have a large Hispanic population in Frankfort due to many of our factories along our main road. So at my school, we are 60% ESL, and that 60% is all Hispanic. As a corporation, we are about 50% ESL. We are also about 80% free and reduced lunches across the district. So we do have a very large ESL population. We have 3 elementary schools. At each of those elementary schools, there are 2 ESL teachers. So kind of thinking about that listening domain, listening is vital in the language classroom because it provides input for the learner. So we need our students to understand what they are hearing. And we need that input to be at the right level for them so that learning can begin. Our goal in ESL teaching and learning is that listening is more than a skill of just hearing something. So we want our students to be able to hear what we're saying, think about it in their head, comprehend what is being said, and then have an output to share. So that's where we kind of get into, well, then what can we do? Again, when we go back to those access scores, we definitely see that our students do well on listening. That's one area that we can usually count on them doing well, usually one of our higher scores. But when we think about that, all they're doing is kind of listening to a story, there are visuals, and then they pick the answer. So listening encompasses so much more than just that access test. So at any time during the presentation, if you have any questions, please just shout out. I like doing these in person much more than on a Zoom. So please feel free to just share anything, ask a question. You can type it in the chat bar. But let's think about that listening domain and what we can do as classroom teachers, ESL teachers, admin, whatever role we play in the elementary school. All right, so some things to be aware of as teachers. I know that this is something that we often, if we're not familiar with ESL, it's something that we can often overlook. Some things to just be aware of when we think of our students, those ESL students, levels 1 through 4, even our levels 5s and 6s, is that sometimes our students just don't hear well. And that can be something that a speech teacher needs, a speech pathologist needs to be involved in. And we've had that come across too. So it's not that they don't know how to listen, they just don't hear very well. So that's one aspect that we can think about when thinking of that listening domain. Another one is what we think of listening can involve more than just those sound cues. And that's what we're really going to get into today is thinking about all that listening entails when we think of our students and what we want them to listen to and understand. Also, sometimes I know that I used to be guilty of as a teacher, we give them a reading and writing task to demonstrate that they have understood a listening task or a listening text, but maybe they have problems with literacy rather than actual listening. So it's one of those things that I often talk to with my teachers is thinking about what are we assessing here? If we're assessing listening, then we need to make sure that that is actually what we're testing or assessing them on. If we're assessing them on literacy, then we go that route. But a lot of times we will give our students a literacy task to complete something that we wanted them to listen to, and we wanted to see how well they listen. So really thinking about how to separate those two things. And also, especially ESL students, sometimes students just panic and they stop listening. So if you think about an ESL student hearing something in an L2, trying to transfer it to an L1 and then understand it, a lot of times they just panic and they stop. So when we think of listening, we need to view it as an exercise that needs to be practiced and developed. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So we have 7 strategies that we're going to talk about when we think of listening, because it is an exercise that we have to practice. Think of with your own children at home. How many times have you said, "Are you listening to me? I need you to listen." So it's something that we have to practice. And now we're throwing in that language barrier as well. So 7 ideas to help with listening. Number 1 is listening with purpose. So when we want our students to practice listening, we have to make sure that we are making it very clear what the purpose is for them listening. So whatever our students are listening to, we need to tell them this is the purpose for this. And the purpose for that is to not just be a better listener. That is way too broad for our learners. So when we say, I want you to listen to the story and just practice being a good listener. Well, a lot of times to them, being a good listener means that you're sitting there and you're looking at the person. And our students, they can do that. But listening is so much more than that. So we can't just use that broad phrase of we're going to practice being good listeners, because we need them doing so much more than that. So we need to communicate what that is from the very, very beginning. If we're going to focus on a story, and we want them to listen to maybe when the character's feelings change. So as I'm reading this story to you today, listen for when you hear the character's feelings change. When you hear them change, raise your hand and let's talk about it. What caused them to change? How could you tell they changed? As I'm reading this story to you today, I want you to listen. What do you think the main idea is? So I'm going to read a couple of pages. Tell me what you think the main idea on those pages is. That's your purpose today. So really making that very clear to them from the beginning, and to get rid of that phrase that we are going to practice being better listeners, because that's not a purpose. Our students do that pretty well. We need to set that academic purpose for them. And this can be done in social areas, in conversations, in academic lessons. We always set that purpose. When I think about like morning meeting time with my kids, thinking of, guys, our purpose today is going to be to talk about what we did over the weekend. And then I want you to tell me something that someone else did over the weekend. So as we go around the circle, when we come to you, you're going to share what you did and then maybe make a connection with what somebody else did. So even in those fun, just sharing ways where it's just that conversational language, still giving them a purpose for listening. Because we all know how that goes, that they're not really listening to anybody else. They're waiting for their turn. And if you said, what did Jesus just say? They can't tell you. So really giving them that purpose. One thing that we use a lot of is the enhanced EL curriculum from Reading A to Z. So if you use Reading A to Z, we have purchased that extra component, which is the enhanced ELL. And then what I've done for each of those books is broken them down into the different domains. So really making sure, again, that that purpose is there. So you can see, like on day 3, we are focused on speaking and listening. Everything that we're doing in there is focused on those 2 domains, and there is a purpose in each one of those, and the students know what that purpose is. So every one of these lessons is broken down to focus on the different domains. Here we go. On day 7, we're going to be speaking and listening again. Obviously, on all of the days, we're doing listening, we're doing speaking, we're reading. Sometimes we're writing each day, but this is the focus day where that purpose is very clear to them. So these are one things that I have designed for all of those enhanced EL lesson plans on Reading A to Z. So if you do have that component to Reading A to Z, I would be happy to share these with you. And then we just break them down into those can-do descriptors where we can put our students in there, and we know exactly where they are and what we need to do to kind of help them move up to that next level. So again, I would be happy to share those if you have that component to Reading A to Z. Even if you don't have that component, a lot of these books are available with just Reading A to Z. So please just let me know, and I'd be happy to share those lesson plans with you. All right. So that is number 1, always setting that purpose. The next strategy when we think of our ELs, making them, this is a huge one. We need for them to move from being passive listeners to active listeners. And that's a huge step for not just our ELs, for a lot of our students. So when we think of our students, we want them to be active in their listening exercises. When they are listening to me, when they are listening to another student, when they are listening to the announcements, when they are listening to a video, when they are listening to whatever, what we want happening in their brains is for them to be thinking of opinions that they have while they're listening. We want them to be thinking of reactions that they have. We want them to be thinking of ideas, different options. Maybe they disagree totally. We want them having those kind of thoughts in their heads. Think of the conversations that our students have now. I always share this kind of when I'm talking about that listening domain with our teachers, because our students, they struggle to listen. If you sit at a circle or somebody's sharing something that happened this weekend, it's funny, but it's not, because a lot of times, like, you could have one student sharing, okay, I played video games this weekend with my friend. The next kid might say, well, this weekend my dog died. And then all of a sudden, the next person shares that they went to Walmart and got a toy. So it shows that they're not totally doing all of those parts of listening. Because if we are truly listening, when somebody says something like that, we should say automatically, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, what happened? Had you had this dog for a long time? So we want them to listen and then have that reaction. So instead of just moving on to the next person or just staring at them and then waiting for the next person to speak, we want them to be more active. We want them to have a reaction to what was said. Just like a lot of times if they talk about playing Fortnite, you know how that can generate so many discussions. That needs to be that active listening that happens with everything that everybody says. And then that's how we develop more of our literacy skills. That's how we develop more kind of language skills. So that's something that we really want to think about. One of the things that I always stress to kind of our teachers is that we don't become better listeners by just sitting back and listening. We have to be actively involved in it. And it's something that we have to hold them accountable to do. And yes, they need that scaffolding. So these are some things that I've created, just some conversation bubbles that kind of helps them get that. You know how we have to scaffold it for them. They're not just going to pick up on how to respond to conversations, how to listen, and then have an opinion. So these are just things that I've copied on colored paper for our teachers, and we hang them in the room. I mean, totally what is applicable to that grade level. Some of these we wouldn't have in a kindergarten classroom or a first grade classroom, but these are just conversation clouds that they know to look at if they need to. And then the great thing about a scaffold is that it stays in place until they understand it. And then most of the time now, our students don't even look at them because they've practiced so much in how to listen and then respond. So these are available for you to click on. Another thing that we have for some of our older students that I made are just these accountable talk bookmarks. And it's just kind of the conversation clouds on a bookmark for them. That way, when they're having those partner times, that yes, this is speaking, but it's more about listening. So to agree with somebody, I need to listen to what they say so that I can agree with it and provide that evidence. To disagree with somebody, I need to listen to what they say so that I know what I disagree with. Same thing in confirming. How many times have you had partners talk and share, and then you say, all right, so Juan, what did Jesus say? And Juan just looks at you like, I have no idea. Juan wasn't listening. He was probably looking at Jesus and saw his lips moving, but he wasn't truly listening to what he was saying. And that's what we need our students to do. So turn and talk is a great strategy to use, but it's one that you have to be very, you have to hold them accountable to, which is why a lot of times I'll say, Juan, I don't want to hear what you shared. I want to hear what your partner shared. And then then I'll flip it. So Juan's partner, what did he say? So just really holding them accountable to that. Another thing that's available for you that I made are just these sentence frame kind of key rings. And these are things that really help them develop that active listening. And the link to the actual sentence frames will be later on in the presentation. But all we did was I put them on keychains for a lot of our students, especially like 2nd through 5th grade. So they each have a set of these sentence frames, and they can flip through there to kind of have that prompt. So after they listen, then they can respond using that prompt. So as you know, listening and speaking go very closely together, but I can't speak about something that someone else said unless I'm listening. So these are just little scaffolds that help them. And again, as they use them, the whole goal of a scaffold is to slowly take it away. All right, so that's number 2. I think that is one of the biggest ones, helping them move from that passive listener to that active listener. And I think many of us would say that our students are very passive listeners. And just kind of a fun activity to do with your class when you get back is to just ask them, what did he just say? Or even what did you just say? And really holding them accountable to that in that loving way, of course. All right, so number 3, the third strategy, just like setting that clear purpose for an activity, we have to have those clear instructions for our students. And as we know, ELs, there's that language barrier. So a lot of times those instructions we make are very visual. So step by step by step, here's what we want you to do. This is how this activity is going to work. And here's what you're going to do with this activity. So you're going to listen to this, and then I want you to fill in the blanks. You're going to listen to this, and then it's true, false. Or listen to this and write down answers. We have to be very clear in what those instructions are for our students. And clear and concise. As we know, a lot of times our students need those visuals to help them understand what we want from them. So one thing that I modified from another kind of go-to strategy, I put them all together in a book, and then each of our teachers have one of these books, and you'll have the link to this. But all this are just all sorts of different games to help develop those listening skills, as well as there's a section for reading and writing. But these are all ways to help our students develop those stronger listening skills. What I like about these is that the purpose is very clear. Here's what we want them to do. Here are the levels that it's good for. So a lot of them, it might just say level 1, or it might say 4 and 5 or 3 through 5. So obviously we would not want to use those with level 1s, but it tells you what your actions are and what the student actions are. And then these are just great games to play to build those listening skills, because as you can see, a lot of them, the student actions will say they need to listen to the input. They need to listen to the teacher. Then they need to have that output. They can't have the output unless they're listening to the input. So it's just a great way to help them become more active listeners and to have those very clear instructions so that they know exactly what they are doing. So all this is, oh my goodness, we just flipped through a bunch. So all this is I just put them together in a book, and gave them to all of our teachers, and they can use them whenever they want. The link, you're welcome to print these and put them into a book. But they're definitely games that help our students become better listeners and follow through with those very clear step-by-step instructions. So all sorts of different sections and then games to use. A lot of them are like those Kagan strategies, you know, the inside-outside circle, the lines where you move the line back and forth, so they have to listen to their partner, share with another partner what that one said. So all sorts of ways to become those more active listeners. All right, number 4, use variety. So when we think about listening, like I said, that the listening test on Access, yes, our students usually do very well on that because it's one form of listening. They're listening to a story and they answer a question. The visual is right there. Well, that's one type of listening. So when we think of listening strategies, we want to mix it up and we want to use a variety, because throughout the day, I listen in many different ways. And some ways I listen a little better than others. Like, I'm terrible about listening to our morning announcements just because I'm usually so busy getting stuff done that a lot of times I'll ask a question to another teacher that was on the morning announcements. So thinking about all of those different types of listening that we have to do throughout the day, if my principal is talking directly to me, I'm listening a lot better than when I'm listening to the announcements. So just helping our kids understand that while we all need to be good listeners at all times, there are those different kind of times during the day or times during our lives when we listen a little more tuned in. So when we think of listening, we have those top-down approaches, and then we have the bottom-up approaches. So we're really good at those top-down approaches. So, all right, guys, I'm going to read this story, and I want you to listen for the main idea. Or let's make some predictions. Look at this picture or listen to this first page. What do you think is going to happen based on what I just read? Or you read the first page to a partner and let's draw some conclusions. So based on the way the character was behaving, what do you think is going to happen? Summarizing. So I'm going to read a story and let's summarize it. We could summarize a page, or we could summarize the whole book. Sequencing, inferring, all of those are those top-down strategies or those top-down approaches that we're really good about setting up for our students to listen to. But a lot of times we need to chunk those for our ESL students, and we're going to listen to a smaller part and then do some of those things. Bottom up are approaches that we've really been focused on this year with our teachers and our PDs, of making sure that they are really focusing on these as well as those top-down approaches. So it's a different kind of fine-tune of listening, because those bottom-up approaches are listening for very specific details in a story or just in a conversation. Maybe it's recognizing cognates. Oh, that sounds the same in Spanish. So really having that fine-tuned listening to where they're not focused on a character or a main idea, but they're focused on that, like that really finite detail of a story, of language. Recognizing word order patterns, so how we say certain things, like, or grammatical structures. I know just the other day, my students, we were listening to past tense. So they were listening for all of that ED in words, because as we know, ED is sometimes hard for ESLs. They jumped-ed, talked-ed. So we were really listening for those in a story. I didn't care about them understanding the main idea right then. I wanted them to fine-tune and listen for those grammatical structures. So really thinking of that variety, because our students they get very used to, she's going to read me a story and then she's going to ask me what happened, or she's going to ask me, what do I think will happen? So really mixing it up so that they don't get used to one type of way of always listening. One thing that I made for kind of our students and our teachers is, a lot of times we ask them these questions and they get these words confused, those questioning words. So really helping them understand that when you hear me say who, that means people. So your answer should have like names in it or people in it. Which means we're choosing. So really just helping them. It's another scaffold. Yes, they're still listening, but this is helping them focus, like, okay, she wants us to find out who the villain is in the story, or what happened, or whose is this? When did they go to the swimming pool? When is a time? So really thinking about helping them set up. So, okay, I want them to listen for this, but I don't want that obstacle of not understanding when to be in the way or where to be in the way. I don't want them not understanding a word to get in the way of them listening. So just providing those scaffolds for them. All right, number 5. This is a fun one and one that kids definitely love. So strategy number 5 is keeping it real. So making sure, like I remember when I was in school and the teacher would send you back to the, I'm gonna date myself, to the tape recorder. And you would sit there and you would listen and it would beep and then you'd have to go to the next page. And a lot of times you didn't even know what the story was about. You just waited for that beep and you turned the page. So that's one thing of listening, but our students now and everything that they're surrounded with every day, technology-wise, we have to keep it real for them. If we want them listening, we have to kind of meet them in this century. So thinking about a large part of listening involves reading facial expressions. And I tell my kids all the time, like sometimes when they read to me, they have no facial expressions or they have no intonation. There's no emotion in their voice. They could be reading a story and then his house caught on fire and they were running down the street screaming and they were so scared and they didn't know what to do and they couldn't find the cat. No emotion whatsoever, which is why a lot of times our students have trouble comprehending a story. Because if they listen, when they listen to us, they comprehend a story a lot better, even if they're a good reader, than when they read it. And that's because teacher read alouds are full of emotion. They are full of facial expressions and gestures and body movement. And that's what our students need to see. So I don't know why it keeps flipping, sorry. So just thinking about how we can use those in our story. Oh my goodness, it's going everywhere. Sorry, guys. Thinking about how we can use those in our story to help our students understand. I'm trying to get back to it, sorry. So thinking, how can we use movies in our listening activities, TV shows, songs. We have to eat lunch in our rooms now because of COVID, so we always have a movie on. And it's a perfect opportunity to be like, oh my gosh, what do you guys think is gonna happen next based on what just happened? And we can have those conversations. Another one, commercials. So funny with watching YouTube in the room, the Grammarly commercial comes up every single day during lunch. My students know what Grammarly is now. They know it helps you be a better writer and it checks your work. But it's hilarious because they've watched it so many times and have listened to it. So just using those real things to kind of help them understand. Story-Nori is a great one. Children's podcasts are awesome to use. My older kids are obsessed with using the GIFs or the GIFs. I don't know how you pronounce it, but just showing them like scared is, oh my gosh, when I'm scared, my face looks different than when I don't know what is going on. My computer is so sensitive. Showing them like, here's what bored looks like. Maybe it'll load. So giving them that emotion with it. My older kids now, my 3rd through 5th graders, will actually insert these into their writing to show that emotion. So really just kind of thinking about how can we make it real for our students. And this is just an example of a read aloud with my little guys, and just really taking that time to let them explore with the book and let them talk about it, let them question things. So yes, I want them listening to me, but I also want them to have that interaction with the book. Pete, these are my kindergartners. Look, what are these? Presents. Oh, who is he dressed like? Santa Claus. He has on a Santa Claus hat. So we won't watch the whole thing, but as you can see, they are interacting with that book and I'm asking them questions. They can't answer those questions if they aren't listening. And these are just 5-year-olds, 5 and 6-year-olds. So obviously we're not going into all of that detail, but I want them listening to what I'm saying and making those connections. So keeping it very real and using all of those different kind of avenues to help develop those listening skills. Number 6, do the work. We need our students doing the work. So we can plan it out, we can set it up, but we have to hold them accountable to do the work. A lot of times, especially with ESL, it's the teacher in us. We want to rescue them. We lean down if we can't hear them, or we try to answer for them. That's not helping them. We need them being those active listeners and then forming ideas to what's been said. They don't have to be right all the time, but we do want them listening and developing those thoughts and that output on their own. So one thing that we use to kind of really, oh my goodness, you guys, I'm so sorry. One of those things we really, that I've made for each of our classrooms 2 through 5 is just this chart. And it's kind of that deeper questioning, deeper listening chart. So it's that really focused listening. And then you can also use it for kind of flip it around for reading. So you're gonna read and find this. Or it's good for listening, helping them become those active listeners. So I might, before a story, put some questions up. All right, guys, so when we read this article today, your purpose is to tell me, what is the definition of lightning? So I'm gonna read this article. When I'm done with it, I want you to be able to tell me, what is the definition of lightning? Now, a lot of times what we'll do is we'll do these in groups. So then this group will do the what is question. Another group might do the where would question. And then we come together and we share. So not only is it making them listen and find the answer, now the output has to be that they're going to teach another group. That group has to listen to get the answer and to get the information. So it's just building all of that into everything that we do and thinking about, how can I hold them more accountable? I want them doing the work. I could easily tell them and read it and say, hey guys, this is the definition of lightning. But I want them zoned in and listening and being very active in what we're doing. So that accountability is huge. And then that comes into this next slide. And I think that this is one of the most important things. About 3 years ago at my school, we had this big advocacy kind of campaign almost, where we just really noticed that our students, they were okay with just sitting there. And I'm talking about all of our students. They were okay with sitting there and not knowing or not understanding something. And so we really went through this advocacy kick where we had posters hung up in the room with the sentence frames to help them, and we really just kind of say to them, it is not okay to sit and not understand something. It's not okay to sit and not know a word, not know the meaning of something, and not raise your hand and say, I need help. It is okay to need help. And we even gave them examples of in teachers' meetings. If the principal says a word that we're not sure of or needs us to do something, I'm not going to sit there and pretend I know what it is, because that's not going to get the task done for my principal. So just really holding them accountable. We need them to not just nod in agreement. You know how it is. If you ask your students if they understand, give me a thumbs up. If you get it, they're all going to put their thumbs up. They all get it. Well, we need them saying no, I'm not so sure about that. Once they start to do it and they realize that it's okay to make mistakes or to not understand, that's where you're going to see them raise their hands all the time. And we've gotten so much better at that now. But we need them, first of all, to kind of check for meaning. Do I understand what is happening or what is being said? We were doing a Christmas activity, and one of the stories that we were reading, it kept talking about a wreath. And they didn't know, a couple of them didn't know what that word was. Well, had they not spoken up, they would have gone through the whole thing. And then one of the tasks was to draw your favorite kind of wreath. They would have had no clue. They would have been looking at other people. So all they need to do is raise their hand and say, Mrs. Fresh, what is a wreath? Once I showed them the visual, they were like, oh, my mom has one of those. They just didn't know the word for it, or they didn't know what the word meant. So just really teaching them to speak up for themselves. So for example, if the word blue was in a story, blue meaning sad, they first needed to learn how to check for meaning. So he said he was feeling blue. Does that mean he was feeling sad because kind of the things that we were talking about, he didn't seem like he was happy? So maybe blue means he's sad. And then this is the big one. Number 2, we need them to ask for clarification. So just say, what did he mean when he said he was feeling blue? Or Mrs. Fresh, what does blue mean? I know it means the color, but what else does it mean? That simple task right there of them advocating helps them become better listeners and helps them understand more. Now, if they're not listening, then they're not going to know to raise their hands and to advocate. So that's why we really have to teach that. And then we need them to rephrase it. So blue means happy or unsad. He was feeling unhappy and sad, right? That means he was feeling blue. So one way, again, these sentence frames that you will have access to this, these are part of these used to be at the very end are advocacy frames. These used to be big posters that hung in all of our classrooms to really kind of help motivate our students to speak up more. And then all I did was I took them and put them into those little keychains. So showing them, okay, can you help me with this question because I don't understand, again, what main idea is. I'm confused with number 2 because I don't see where that is in the story. So really helping them talk through something when they don't understand. And again, these are a lot of our second graders, but all of our 3rd, 4th, and 5th ELs have these keychains and they use them. So definitely something worth making or giving to your teachers to make. So that's kind of when we think of listening, that's what we think about, those 7 strategies to really help our students become better listeners. Because listening, it requires that skill of focusing on the speaker. Our students do a good job of looking at you, but we need them focused and we need them thinking about what they're saying, coming up with those opinions, and then giving that output. ELs get tons of practice listening in English throughout the day. I mean, they are immersed in language, especially our primary students. They're immersed in that developmental language listening. But our goal is to teach them how to become active listeners. So yes, they're listening all day long, but we want them being active listeners all day long. And merely just sitting and listening to something for hours is not going to do the trick. We need to have those focused listening exercises for our students so that they understand what it means to be an active listener and what it means to participate. So these are some fun little, now Fluent U, you have to join it, but a lot of things they will give you kind of just free little articles and tidbits. These are great. I've kind of downloaded this just in case it ever goes away, but just some other fun listening games to play with your students. And they even give kind of ideas of like video that you can use, but some great ideas to kind of practice being those active listeners with your students. And the link of what I downloaded is on there, so you should be able to access it easily. If not, if they say that you have to join, just email me and I'll send you the PDF of it that I have. But a lot of these are also in that Go-To strategy book that you have access to also. So just to kind of wrap things up, just thank you so much. And I do have your emails from Tammy, and I will get those. I will get the presentation to you so that you can have access to it. You're welcome to share it with anybody. You are welcome to do whatever you want to do with it, and then print anything. So for the next 3, if you're able to come to those, I will have a ton of other kind of visuals that I've made, resources that I've made that I will give you total access to, kind of thematic things, and then just different things to help with reading, to help with writing, some units, and then also speaking. So I appreciate you guys so much for coming, and I will email the presentation to you. But does anybody have any questions?
I do.
Yes.
I was wondering if we have a conflict with the time because we're on Central Time, will it be recorded and sent to us, those other ones? Can we do it that way?
Yes, absolutely. Tammy, I record them anyway, but she reached out to me earlier and said to record them so that we can email. So yes, everything will be sent to you.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And guys, thanks again for coming, and stay warm and stay safe. And I will see you later.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.